My name is David Harlow, and I am 56 years old now. And even after living all these years through storms, through hardship, through long nights and early mornings, through moments when I thought life had already shown me its worst, I found out I was wrong the day my parents sat me down and looked me in the eye with expressions that did not belong to the people who raised me, and told me that my inheritance had been reallocated. I remember standing still as if the world had stopped turning, as if time itself was waiting to see how I would react. That single word, reallocated, echoed inside my skull over and over again, with a cold, ringing sound like metal scraping against stone. It did not feel like a normal word. It felt like a blow, a hit, a strike to everything I believed about family, duty, loyalty, and sacrifice. It felt like a heavy door had slammed shut right in front of me without explanation and without warning. For a moment I convinced myself that maybe they had said something else, something softer, something that made sense. But no, their voices were too steady, too rehearsed, too controlled. They looked straight at me without flinching, and in that moment I understood that something was deeply wrong, something hidden, something they never wanted me to uncover. I walked out of that room not because I was angry, but because I could not understand the world I was suddenly standing in. The sun outside felt too bright. The air felt too thin. Even the land around our house, the land I had worked for decades, looked unfamiliar. That night when I lay down, I could not sleep no matter how hard I tried. My mind kept circling back to all the sacrifices I had made, all the choices I had changed, all the dreams I had buried. I gave up a life in the city because they needed me. I spent years working double shifts in a small repair shop where the air was thick with oil and dust. I spent long winters in the harsh Texas cold fixing broken machinery while my own hands went numb. I took them to every medical appointment and filled every prescription and sat beside every hospital bed. I did not complain. I did not ask for anything in return. I told myself over and over again that family meant showing up no matter how hard it got. But now when I look back, the one promise that kept me going, that simple promise that the ranch and the land and the legacy would someday be mine, that promise had been taken from me with one cold word: reallocated. That word sat heavy on my chest like a weight I could not lift. I kept replaying their faces in my mind. My mother had looked away the moment she said it. My father had stared at the floor. It was like watching two strangers play the role of parents I no longer recognized. And I kept asking myself why. Why after all I had done? Why after all I had given? Why after all the years I stayed when everyone else left? Why would they give away something that was promised to me since childhood? They did not tell me who it went to. They did not explain the reason. They did not even show guilt in the moment. They just spoke the word reallocated like it was nothing, like it was a change in a grocery list. But I knew there was more. My gut told me something was hiding behind their silence, something they were too afraid to say, something they had been pushed into, something that had roots deeper than I could see. I felt a strange calm rise inside me that night as I sat alone in the dark. I understood that anger would blind me, but patience would guide me. I needed to move slowly. I needed to observe everything. I needed to listen more carefully. And that decision became the first step toward uncovering a truth so deep and so painful that it changed the course of my life forever. Over the next few days, I watched my parents closely. I noticed small things I had ignored before. The way my mother avoided meeting my eyes, the way my father paused before answering simple questions, the way they whispered to each other when they thought I was out of earshot. And each sign added another piece to a puzzle I did not yet understand, but I could feel it building inside me. A storm, a truth, something powerful enough to explain why they had betrayed their own son. And then one night everything shifted. I was cleaning the old storage room next to my father's office when I found a small black camera tucked behind a stack of dusty books. The moment I held it in my hands, I felt something heavy move inside my chest, like instinct warning me that this little device carried answers. I pressed the power button without knowing what I was about to see. And what appeared on the screen changed everything I thought I knew about my family, about loyalty, and about betrayal. The footage revealed more than just secrets. It revealed manipulation, pressure, lies spoken behind closed doors. It revealed the real person behind the sudden change in my parents' behavior. It revealed the one who had pushed them to take my inheritance away, the one who wanted everything I worked for, the one who planned the betrayal from the shadows. That footage became the turning point in my life. It became the weapon I never asked for but desperately needed. It became the tool that would clear the fog, remove the lies, and show me the truth with painful clarity. That footage became my revenge, not the kind that hurts, but the kind that exposes, the kind that shines light into dark places, the kind that brings justice without raising a hand, the kind that makes the guilty reveal themselves. This is my story, told in my own voice, told with the weight of every memory and every sacrifice, told from the first sign that something was wrong to the moment I stood tall again and reclaimed what was taken from me. I did not choose this path. It was handed to me when my own parents looked at me with calm eyes and told me that my future had been given to someone else. And from that moment forward, I knew that my life would never be the same. I grew up in a small ranch town outside Austin, where the roads were dusty most of the year, and the mornings smelled like fresh hay and warm earth. Life moved slow out there, almost like time respected the land, and did not rush it the way it rushed people in cities. My family owned a large stretch of open land that spread farther than my younger eyes could ever see, and every part of it held pieces of our history. My father said the land carried the memory of every generation that walked on it, and that someday it would carry mine too. He told me quietly when I was a boy that the land would be mine because I was the one with enough heart to stay close. I believed him. I believed him for decades. My brother left when he was 20, and I remember watching him pack his old battered suitcase with a mix of excitement and impatience. He said ranch life was too slow for him. He wanted noise and concrete and bright city lights. He promised to visit, but he barely called after he left. My sister left a couple years later after she married a man who liked the ocean more than fields. They moved to the coast where life was easier, and stores were always open, and neighbors barely knew one another. She used to say the ranch felt too quiet, too empty, too heavy. She said it made her feel stuck, but I never felt stuck. I felt grounded. I felt like the land trusted me the same way I trusted it. So I stayed. I stayed because someone had to. My parents were getting older even then, and they needed someone who understood the ranch and understood them. They needed someone who could fix a broken fence before wandering cattle got lost. Someone who knew how to repair the old water pump that liked to stall at the worst times. Someone who could brave the winter storms that dropped ice on everything and cut off power for days. They needed someone who would show up without being asked. My brother was gone. My sister had moved on. That left me, and I accepted that role without resentment. I told myself that loyalty meant something, and that staying was not a burden but a responsibility I carried with pride. Every morning I woke before the sun rose and walked across the land with my father. We would move in quiet, steady steps through fields still covered in early dew. My father said the land woke up slowly like an old friend stretching after a long sleep. I learned every corner of that property, from the brittle patches of dry soil in the far west fields to the thick muddy ground near the creek. I repaired broken gates. I fed livestock during cold winds. I replaced windows after storms. I scrubbed old tools until they shined again. I even took seasonal work at the repair shop in town when bills grew too heavy. My mother would hug me after every long day and say, "One day all this will come back to you." Those words stayed with me. They kept me steady even on the hardest nights. But when I turned 50, everything changed in slow, painful ways. My father began moving slower than I ever remembered. He would sit down more often and catch his breath like each step carried a little weight he could not shake. My mother started forgetting small things at first, then bigger things. She would ask me what day it was more than once. She would leave the stove on. She misplaced keys and names and moments. I stepped in without hesitation. I handled bills. I arranged appointments. I drove them to every checkup. The ranch fell completely into my hands, but I did not complain. I believed I was fulfilling the promise that loyalty makes. I believed they trusted me fully, and they did, or at least I thought so. Then one morning, without warning, my sister arrived after being gone for years. She came dressed sharp in city clothes that looked too clean for ranch dust. Her smile felt too wide, too bright, too practiced. I watched her step out of her car as if she owned the driveway. My parents rushed to greet her with open arms and warm voices, and something about that moment prickled at my senses. She had not shown interest in the ranch in decades, yet she walked around the property that day asking question after question. What is the market value now? How far is the property line? What are your plans for the future? She asked everything with a polite tone, but her eyes glowed with calculation, like she was seeing something she wanted to claim. Every time she asked a question, my mother would glance at my father with a strange expression that left a knot in my stomach. Something in those glances felt like agreement, secret agreement, hidden decisions. I tried brushing it off at first, but the feeling dug deeper every hour she stayed. Late one evening, I walked past the long hallway and heard voices drifting softly through the thin walls. I paused. It was my sister speaking with my mother and father. Their voices were low, as if they were afraid I would hear them, but the walls in that old house were never thick. I leaned against the doorway quietly. My name came up again and again. Then I heard my mother's voice, soft and trembling, as she said, "I think he will accept it. He is always loyal. He will not fight us." The words hit me like a cold wave. Accept what? Why would I not fight? What decision had they made without me? Why were they speaking about me like I was not part of this family? I stood frozen for a long moment, trying to understand what I had just heard. My chest felt tight. My breath felt slow and heavy. I walked back to my room with a growing sense of dread that something was unfolding behind my back, and whatever it was they believed, I would never challenge it, because I had spent my whole life being the reliable one, the loyal one, the son who never questioned. But loyalty is not blindness, and I felt something deep inside me shift that night, like a quiet alarm ringing. The next morning they called me into the living room. The air felt heavier than usual as I walked in. They sat on the old faded couch side by side with stiff expressions. My sister stood behind them with a smile that made my skin crawl. My father cleared his throat with a shaky sound and said, "David, the inheritance has been reallocated." He said it with no emotion, no explanation, no reason. It felt like he was telling me breakfast was ready. It felt unreal. My mother lowered her head as if she could not look at me. My father stared at the floor. My sister lifted her chin slightly, as if she had already won something. I stood there without saying a word. My throat felt dry. My mind felt blank. There were 1,000 questions inside me, but none of them could escape my mouth. I knew something had happened behind closed doors, something planned carefully, something designed to push me aside. I turned and walked out before I said anything at all. I needed air. I needed to think. I needed space to breathe and steady myself. That night I walked into my father's old office. The room smelled like dust and wood polish. Documents were stacked high in old boxes. I searched through drawers and piles and shelves because I needed answers. I needed proof. I needed something to explain why they had betrayed me after everything I did for them. And then behind a stack of books on a forgotten shelf, I found a small black camera. It looked out of place, like someone had shoved it there in a hurry. I picked it up. My hand shook without my control. Something inside me knew this camera held the truth. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up. And the moment the first image appeared, my breath caught in my chest. Because what I saw on that footage did not just explain the betrayal. It revealed the beginning of a long road that would lead me toward revenge, justice, clarity, and the reclaiming of everything that was ripped away from me. I carried that small black camera out to my truck like it was a live wire ready to burn straight through my hands. My heart felt heavy and tight, and my breathing was uneven, as if the air around me had thickened. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the dark windshield for a long moment before I even had the courage to press the button. A part of me hoped the footage would be nothing. Maybe it would show some routine moment or something harmless that would ease the knot twisting inside my chest. But another part of me knew deep down that whatever was on that camera was the reason it had been hidden. People do not hide ordinary things. They hide the things they fear will come back to bite them. When I finally pressed play, the screen lit up with a shaky view of the kitchen. I recognized the scratched wooden table that had been part of our home since I was a child. I remembered sitting at that same table eating breakfast before school or listening to my father talk about the land every evening. But the moment held no warmth now. It felt cold, heavy, different. My sister sat there first. She was dressed neatly in clothes that looked too expensive for her usual style. Her hair was done perfectly, and she carried herself like someone who believed she had already won the fight. She had that same polite smile she used on people when she wanted something. The kind of smile that did not reach her eyes. I could almost feel her arrogance through the screen. It made my jaw tighten. My mother sat across from her, leaning forward with her hands twisting together. That was her nervous habit. She did it whenever she felt guilty or uncertain. Seeing her look like that made my stomach sink. My father sat beside her, looking worn down with deep lines in his face. He looked like a man who had been talked into something he did not fully agree with. Then the sound came in clear and sharp. My sister spoke first. Her voice was smooth but cold underneath. She said the ranch had reached a higher value than it ever had before. She said she had talked to people in the city, important people, people who wanted the land for a large development project that would bring in more money than any of us had ever imagined. She said this was the perfect time to sell and the perfect time for her to finally take what belonged to her. I felt the heat rise in my chest because I had lived my entire life on that land. Every sunrise, every scar on my hands, every sacrifice. And she spoke about it like it was nothing more than a bargaining chip she had been waiting to cash in. My mother shook her head. She told her softly that they could never do that to me. She said I had given my whole life to the ranch. She said I had stayed when everyone else left. She said I was the one who kept everything running. My father nodded slowly and added that the ranch had always been promised to me because I was the one who held it all together. But my sister stood up so suddenly the camera shook. She hit her hand on the table and said she was tired of waiting. She said that I had nothing without the ranch and that keeping me tied to that land was not fair to her. Not fair to her. She said she wanted her share and she wanted it right now. She said she deserved it because she had been patient long enough. Hearing those words made something cold settle inside my chest. It was not anger. It was disappointment so deep it felt like grief. My own sister saw the ranch not as our family legacy, but as a prize she wanted to snatch away before anyone else could touch it. She had no interest in the land itself, only in the money it could bring her. Then she said something that stopped everything inside me. She said that I would not fight, that I never fought. She said I always accepted everything that was handed to me. She said I was predictable and loyal and quiet. She said I would just nod and walk away because that was who I had always been. I felt my hands clench around the steering wheel as I watched her talk about me like I was nothing more than a tool. She thought silence meant weakness. She thought loyalty meant surrender. She thought my patience made me blind. She believed she could walk across my future and carve out her own path and I would simply let it happen. That belief would be her downfall. My father whispered that I would be hurt. He sounded tired and defeated. My mother looked torn in two. She said she did not want to break my heart, but my sister brushed it off like she was flicking dust off her sleeve. She said hurt or not it needed to happen and that they had to stand with her because she was family too. I watched their faces. My father looked ashamed. My mother looked trapped. My sister looked triumphant. When the footage ended, the screen went black, but the weight of what I had seen continued pressing down on my chest. I sat there in the quiet of my truck, with only the sound of my own breathing filling the space. I had always believed my family might argue or disagree or even disappoint me at times, but deep betrayal was something I never imagined would come from my own blood. I realized then that this was not a simple matter of inheritance. It was a matter of character, a matter of who stood with me and who stood against me. And now I had proof, real, undeniable proof. I held the truth in my hands, and it was stronger than any excuse they could ever make. I took a slow breath and leaned back in the seat. The sun had dipped low behind the trees, and the ranch looked quiet from where I sat. But a storm had already started inside me, not the kind that makes a man shout or break things, the kind that sharpens his mind, the kind that clears out illusion and lights a fire of purpose. I knew I had to move carefully, quietly. I knew if I confronted them without a plan, my sister would twist every word until I looked like the villain. She was skilled at that. She always knew how to manipulate a situation to make herself appear innocent. But this time, I would not walk into her trap. I would build my own. I started thinking through every step, every angle, every detail. I knew this betrayal would not break me. It would push me into action. And with the footage in my hands, I was no longer the man they thought I was. I was no longer the loyal son who would accept anything just to keep the peace. I was a man preparing to reclaim what was mine. For the next few days, I moved through the ranch like a man walking through a dream. On the outside, I acted the same as I always had. I woke before sunrise. I fed the animals one by one, listening to the soft sounds of the morning settling across the land. I repaired the fences and checked the gates. I cleaned the stalls and watered the fields. Everything looked normal from the outside, but inside me something had changed forever. It felt like there was a second heartbeat buried deeper inside my chest, one steady and controlled, one that kept reminding me to stay patient, stay quiet, stay focused. My parents watched me in a way they never had before. My mother followed me with her eyes whenever I walked past her, as if she wanted to say something but could not gather the strength. My father barely met my gaze at all, and every time he did, his eyes looked clouded with guilt. They both seemed older in those days, as if the weight of what they had decided was pressing down harder on their shoulders than they ever expected. I understood then that they were not villains. They were not cruel. They were people who had been pressured, cornered, and worn down by someone who knew exactly how to manipulate them. My sister kept her distance, but she always appeared somewhere nearby, watching me with that same smug expression. She walked around the ranch with a sense of ownership she had never earned. She spoke to my parents in a sweet tone, but the moment she looked at me, her eyes shifted into something sharp and cold. She really believed I was finished. She believed the ranch was already hers. She believed that I was simply too weak to fight back. Every time I saw that look on her face, it fueled my resolve even more. She thought she had already won, and that belief would be her undoing. Every night after everyone went to bed, I sat alone in the dark office with a small black camera plugged into an old laptop. I watched the footage again and again, not because I needed confirmation of what I had seen, but because I needed to study the details. I needed to see the moment my sister pulled my parents into her trap. I needed to understand how she spoke to them, what she emphasized, what she used against them. Each viewing taught me something new. I noticed how my mother flinched whenever my sister raised her voice. I noticed how my father looked down at the table whenever confrontation grew too heavy. I noticed how my sister used her words like hooks, slipping them into their doubts and fears. She told them they were old. She told them they deserved comfort. She told them their later years should be easy and free of work, and that selling the ranch would give them that. She made it sound like she was trying to help them, when in reality she was helping herself. She used my loyalty against me. She used my silence as proof that I would never resist. She used my history of sacrifice as a sign that I would sacrifice again. She built her entire plan on the idea that I would do nothing. But while she spoke so confidently in that footage, she had no idea I was listening now, watching, understanding, planning. One evening, after a long day repairing a broken water line, I walked to the front porch and found my father sitting alone in his old rocking chair. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky with deep red and orange shades that made the whole world look like it was glowing. It would have been a peaceful moment in another life. But that night it felt heavy. I sat down beside him without speaking. He kept looking at the sunset as if it could take him back to an easier time. Then, without turning to me, he whispered that he was sorry. His voice was thin and tired, like it had been hollowed out. Hearing those words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to tell him that he did not have to feel guilty. I wanted to tell him that I knew he had been pushed into something he did not fully agree with. But I also knew that if I spoke too soon, everything I had been preparing would fall apart. So I stayed silent. I let him sit in that moment. And in that silence, he must have felt my understanding, because he did not look at me again. He just took a slow breath and let the sun disappear behind the ridge. That night after they went asleep, I drove into town. I needed answers, no guesswork, no assumptions. I went to see an old friend who had worked in real estate for years. I asked him straight out what would happen if someone tried to sell land that had shared ownership. He told me that every owner must sign willingly. He told me that if anyone tried to force a sale or push someone out without their consent, it could lead to legal trouble quickly. Hearing that felt like someone had opened a window inside my chest, letting fresh air rush in. My sister had manipulated my parents, but she could not erase my legal rights. She could not remove me without paperwork. She could not close any deal without my signature. And I knew she had no idea how strong my position really was. When I returned to the ranch, I went straight to the old office. I pulled out every drawer, every dusty file, every envelope that had been untouched for years. I searched through tax records and handwritten notes and faded receipts. Then finally, I found what I had been hoping for: the original family will. It was signed long before my father began struggling with his memory. The handwriting was steady and clear. The words stated the land would pass to the child who stayed and maintained it. That was not up for debate. That was not something anyone could pretend they misunderstood. That was me, without question. I held the paper in my hands for a long time, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Relief because I finally had my anchor, my legal foundation. Sorrow because this paper represented the trust my father once had in me, long before outside pressure had pulled him away. I placed the will and every other document into a metal safe box I kept hidden. I locked it and placed the key somewhere only I would find. My plan took shape slowly but clearly. I knew confrontation was coming. I knew my sister was building toward some big moment where she would reveal her final move. I could see it in the way she whispered with my mother. I could see it in the way she smirked whenever she passed me in the hallway. I could see it in her confidence that she already controlled the future. What she did not know was that I was letting her think she had won, because the deeper she sank into her own arrogance, the harder the fall would be when the truth finally hit her. I was not preparing for revenge through anger or spite. I was preparing to bring the truth into the open so clearly that no one could twist it. Not her. Not anyone. I knew the moment was coming soon, and when it did, everything would shift. The very next week began with a silence that felt heavier than usual. The mornings were cooler, and the wind carried a strange stillness, as if the land itself sensed what was coming. I was fixing the gate near the front road when I saw a dark sedan approaching the ranch. It was unfamiliar, too polished, too out of place among the dusty paths and old fences. My heart tightened because I already knew this was not a friendly visit. This was a piece of my sister's plan moving into position. The car parked neatly near the house, and my sister stepped out first, dressed in clothes far too fancy for ranch dust. She carried a smile that was stretched too wide, too rehearsed. Then the other door opened, and a man stepped out. He wore a clean-fitted suit, sunglasses, and shoes so shiny they did not belong on country dirt. He stood tall with a briefcase in his hand, and eyes that scanned the property like he was deciding whether to buy a piece of machinery or a herd of cattle. Everything about him screamed business, not family. My sister walked beside him like she owned the place. She pointed at the open fields with excitement in her voice, the same fields I had spent decades tending. Fields I had plowed, repaired, watered, seeded, harvested, and sweated over for more years than I could ever count. Watching a stranger look at them like they were nothing more than empty space ready for a price tag hit me deep, but I held my expression steady. I had learned long ago that silence could be stronger than shouting. When they approached the main house, I walked toward them slowly. My boots hit the ground with the same steady rhythm they always had, but inside me my pulse was hitting harder. My sister stopped when she noticed me, and her smile faltered for half a second. She had not expected me to walk up just then. She wanted conversations behind closed doors. She wanted deals made in whispers. She wanted to keep me out of the light. But I stepped right into it. The man stuck out his hand and introduced himself in a smooth, practiced tone. He worked with a development company from the city, and he spoke as if he already believed the land was his. He described what he called exciting expansion plans. He talked about how the wide open spaces could be used for future construction. He talked about potential profits and long-term investments like those words or magic spells meant to impress everyone who heard them. I listened without giving him any expression. He expected enthusiasm. He expected questions. He expected cooperation. He got none of it. Then he asked a simple question. He wanted to confirm that all decision-makers were present today. Before I could open my mouth, my sister jumped in with a bright, eager yes. That one word cut through the air like a knife, because it revealed everything she had been building toward. She wanted that man to believe she had full authority. She wanted him to believe I was already agreeing to everything. She wanted to erase me before the papers were even drawn. But instead of reacting, I smiled. Not a warm smile, not a friendly one. A calm, steady smile that unsettled her. She knew I did not smile that way unless I knew something she did not. And she was right. Her shoulders tensed and her eyes narrowed slightly. The man looked at me trying to read the situation, but I gave him no clues. I turned and walked toward the barn without a word. My silence hit her harder than any confrontation could. All afternoon they toured the property. My sister walked with confidence, pointing out every corner like she had grown up fixing it. She pointed at the old barn I rebuilt after a storm tore half its roof off. She pointed at the back pasture where I had spent nights keeping sick animals warm. She pointed at the fencing I had repaired in the scorching heat while she was living comfortably on the coast. She used everything I had worked for as bargaining chips for a future she never earned. I watched from a distance, keeping my composure, even though inside my hands were forming fists in my pockets. When the sun began sinking behind the hills, they came inside and sat in the living room. My parents were already sitting on the couch. My mother looked anxious. My father looked lost. My sister looked triumphant, and the man looked impatient to finalize things. I walked in and sat down slowly across from them. My sister jumped right into her pitch. She spoke fast. She spoke confidently. She acted like she was doing all of us a favor by pushing this deal forward. She said the offer was excellent, and that we needed to sign quickly before the opportunity disappeared. My father shifted uncomfortably. My mother rubbed her hands together. Their eyes were full of fear. They did not want conflict. They did not want tension. They wanted peace at any cost. And my sister used that fear like a tool. When she finally finished her long push, she looked at me, waiting for me to agree. Everyone looked at me. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. I leaned forward slightly and spoke with a calm, steady voice. I said that I would only sign after reviewing every legal document thoroughly from start to finish. No rush, no pressure, no blind trust. The look on her face changed instantly. Her smile vanished. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes sharpened with anger. She said I was being difficult. I said I was being responsible. She insisted I was holding everything back. I said I was protecting our family. She raised her voice. I lowered mine. And the quieter I became, the more furious she grew. She finally stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed wrapped around the entire house. My parents sat stiffly, unsure what to say. They were old, they were tired, and they were afraid of their own daughter's temper. I could see it in their faces. They feared she would abandon them or punish them for choosing peace. I understood that fear, but I also knew something else now. I was no longer the man who swallowed his pain for the sake of keeping the family calm. I stood from the table and looked at them. I spoke gently but firmly. I told them I loved them. I told them I would always care for them. And I told them I would not let anyone force them into choices they did not truly want. My mother looked at me with teary eyes. My father looked down at his hands. They both knew I was right, but they were too worn down to say it aloud. I walked out of the room with a strange new strength inside me. My sister thought she had cornered me. She thought pressure would break me. She thought this was the moment she finally won. But she had no idea that the real fight had just begun. The breaking point came quietly at first, like a storm building far beyond the horizon, silent, unseen, but powerful. 2 days after the meeting in the kitchen, 2 days after my sister had stormed away with fire in her eyes and poison in her voice, I was working near the barn repairing a loose board on the side wall. The sun was beating down hard, turning the air thick and dry, making every breath feel like it carried dust. The ranch was silent except for the soft rustling of the wind through the tall grass and the occasional cluck of the chickens nearby. It was the kind of afternoon that should have felt peaceful, familiar, grounding. But instead, it felt heavy and tense, like the earth itself knew something was about to break. I heard her footsteps before I saw her. Sharp, fast, angry steps hitting the ground with purpose. I kept my back turned, partly because I wanted to finish hammering the board in place and partly because I already knew what her face would look like. Frustration wrapped in resentment, mixed with the entitlement she had carried her entire life. When she reached me, she didn't wait even a second before letting her anger spill out. She didn't greet me. She didn't ask me anything. She simply exploded with her usual venom. She said I was ruining everything she had worked for. She said I was being selfish, standing in the way of her chance to finally have something better in life. She said I had no right to question her decisions because she had more ambition than I ever would. She said the ranch meant nothing to her and it shouldn't mean anything to me either. According to her, my simple life, my quiet days, my hard work, they were all worthless. Her words hit like stones, but this time they didn't sink into me the way they used to. This time they bounced off a wall I had finally built inside myself. A wall of truth, a wall of clarity, a wall that showed me exactly who she had become, or maybe who she had been all along, hidden beneath years of blaming the world for her choices. I put down my hammer slowly and turned to face her. For the first time in a long time, I looked directly into her eyes without flinching, without looking away, without lowering my voice or softening my expression. Her face twisted a little, as if she expected me to back down, remain silent, bow like I always did. But I didn't. I told her that she was wrong. I told her that I was done pretending not to see the truth. I told her I knew exactly what she had been doing behind my back, behind our parents' backs, behind the walls of the home we had all grown up in. I told her that she had manipulated our parents with fear, pushing them into decisions that went against their hearts, decisions that made them feel trapped between their children. I told her I knew she had twisted their worries into leverage, convincing them that giving in to her demands would bring peace instead of conflict. And then I told her the part that broke her facade completely. I told her I saw everything. I told her I heard every word. I told her I had the footage. Her face drained of color so fast it was like watching a candle being blown out by a sudden gust of wind. Her lips parted but no sound came out at first. She blinked, trying to steady herself, trying to understand how much I knew. For a moment she looked like a child again, not the confident, greedy woman she had become, but the frightened girl who always feared getting caught. She tried to recover, straightening her shoulders, trying to force a confident expression back onto her face, but her eyes betrayed her. Her eyes were shaking. She asked what footage, but the question wasn't strong. Her voice cracked like dry wood. She already knew the answer. She just didn't want to hear it out loud. She stepped closer, trying to tower over me, trying to reclaim the dominance she had always held over conversations, but something inside her had changed. She could no longer intimidate me. Her presence no longer felt like a shadow over my life. She had lost the only power she ever had, my silence. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't threaten her, I didn't push her away or walk off. I simply repeated that she would see everything soon. The truth could not be buried anymore. The truth was no longer hiding in a corner. The truth was in my hands, and she knew it. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, she turned away from me looking smaller, weaker, shaken. She walked back toward the house, but this time her steps weren't sharp or confident. They were uneven, rushed, trembling. Her shoulders were tight and shaking slightly, like someone desperately trying not to cry or scream. That evening became the moment when everything finally cracked open. My sister, still panicked from our confrontation, tried to force my parents to finalize the sale papers. She gathered them in the living room, speaking fast, almost breathless, piling words on top of each other as if speed would hide the fear in her voice. She said they needed to sign quickly before the opportunity slipped away. She said waiting would cost them more money. She said the company wanted answers. She said this was their chance to make things easier. She said so many things so fast that my parents could barely process a single sentence. My parents sat there with wide, confused eyes. My mother wrung her hands until her knuckles turned pale. My father looked overwhelmed as if he couldn't catch his breath. They were too tired to argue and too afraid to disappoint her, but I stood behind them, silent, still, watching her. She knew I was there. She could feel my presence like a shadow rising behind her. She didn't dare turn around. She didn't know that everything was about to change. She didn't know that her final push, her desperate attempt to force the sale, was only going to bring her closer to the moment she feared the most. The moment where her lies would crumble, where her manipulations would be exposed, where her grip on our parents would break forever. She didn't know that the truth was not only coming, it was already standing in the room. The next morning felt different from any morning before it. The air inside the house was thick, heavy, almost tense enough to touch with my hands. I woke early, long before the sun had fully risen, and I stood at my window for a long moment watching the sky shift from deep gray into soft orange. Today was not a day of work or chores or quiet restraint. Today was the day everything came to light. Today the truth finally stepped out of the shadows. I walked through the hallway slowly, my footsteps steady, my breath controlled. I carried the small black camera in my hand, its weight feeling heavier than it ever had before. Not because the device was heavy, but because of what it contained, because of the power it now held. It wasn't just a camera anymore. It was the key that would unlock everything that had been locked away. It was the voice I never used. It was the proof no one could deny. I asked everyone to come into the living room. My parents shuffled in quietly, confusion and worry written across their faces. They sat down on the old worn-out couch, the same couch that had held countless family memories, birthdays, holidays, arguments, laughter, all the things that once made us feel whole. But now it felt different. It felt like the room itself was holding its breath. My sister came last. She didn't sit. She didn't relax. She leaned against the doorway with her arms tightly crossed over her chest, her jaw clenched so hard I could see the tension throbbing in her neck. She watched me with narrowed eyes, searching for weakness, searching for any sign of hesitation, but there was none. The moment she noticed the camera in my hand, her expression shifted just for a fraction of a second. Her confidence flickered. Her eyelids twitched. Her breath caught. She tried to hide the fear, but I saw it clearly. I set the camera gently on the table in the center of the room. My mother gasped softly when she recognized it, her hand flying to her mouth. My father leaned forward, his brows furrowing with concern. My sister's body stiffened completely. She looked like someone preparing for impact, already bracing for something she could not stop. I didn't give a speech. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply reached out, pressed the play button, and stepped back. The room filled with the sound of their own voices, voices they had spoken in private moments, voices they never expected to hear again, voices that carried more weight now than they ever realized. The words spilled into the air, harsh and sharp and heavy. My mother's voice trembling with confusion. My father's voice tired and defeated. My sister's voice cold, confident, calculated, cutting through them both like a blade. Every whisper she had used to pressure them echoed across the room. Every manipulation she fed them surfaced with painful clarity. Every cruel comment she made about me, about my silence, my loyalty, my supposed weakness, hung in the air with nowhere to hide. My mother's eyes filled slowly with tears. She pressed her fingers into the couch cushion so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. My father's shoulders dropped as though someone had placed a heavy weight on him that he could no longer hold up. He lowered his head, ashamed, absorbing every moment of the truth he had tried so hard not to confront. My sister reacted differently. She stepped forward once as if she wanted to shut the camera off, to silence the truth, to erase everything being exposed. But I lifted my hand, not angrily, just firmly. She froze. For the first time in our lives, she froze at my command. She looked at me with a mix of shock and frustration, but she did not move again. She knew she couldn't justify anything while the truth played out so clearly. She knew her excuses would be useless. When the final seconds of the recording ended, the room fell into a silence so deep it felt like the house itself had stopped breathing. The kind of silence that comes only after a storm that has destroyed everything false in its path. No one spoke. No one moved. My sister lowered her eyes. Her arms slowly uncrossed as if the weight of her own actions finally pressed them down. Her face was pale, defeated, stripped of all the confidence she had carried just days before. For the first time, she had no story to twist, no argument to push, no escape to run to. Her power, the power she had built through manipulation, had shattered completely. My parents both looked at me with faces full of regret and heartbreak. My mother wiped at her tears with trembling hands. My father looked as though the truth had taken years off his life in a single moment. Their guilt was raw, almost painful to witness, but it was real. And it was time for real emotions to finally be allowed into this family again. I sat down slowly, letting the silence settle before I spoke. When I finally did, my voice was calm, not angry, not cruel, not vengeful, just honest. I told them I didn't want revenge that punished them. I didn't want to tear the family apart. I didn't want to make anyone live in fear or shame. What I wanted was simple. I wanted clarity. I wanted honesty. I wanted respect for the years I had poured into the land they had tried to take from me. I wanted them to see the truth they had tried to hide from. I wanted them to understand that my silence had never been weakness. It had been love. And that love had been taken advantage of for far too long. My father nodded slowly, his face heavy with remorse. He whispered that he had been wrong. The words were quiet, but they carried decades of meaning. My mother reached for my hand with tears still flowing down her cheeks. She squeezed my fingers gently, the way she used to when I was a child, and she wanted me to know I wasn't alone. For the first time in what felt like years, I felt seen, truly seen, not overlooked, not dismissed, seen. The truth had finally taken its rightful place in the center of our family, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after the reveal carried a strange, almost fragile calm. The tension that had gripped the house for weeks seemed to hang in the air like fog over the fields, heavy but slowly lifting with the promise of sunlight. I woke early and walked through the ranch, feeling the earth under my boots and the quiet wind brushing my face. Every detail of this land, the fences I had repaired, the pastures I had tended, the barns I had rebuilt, felt like a testament to the years I had given. But it was more than just land now. It was proof. It was justice waiting to be claimed in the right way. I knew that my revenge could not be about destruction. I had seen too many lives ruined by anger and rage, and that was never what I wanted. My sister had tried to take everything through fear and manipulation, but I realized I did not need to meet her cruelty with cruelty of my own. I needed something stronger. I needed truth. I needed boundaries. I needed clarity, fairness, and a way to protect the life I had built without staining myself with bitterness. I gathered my parents in the living room, the same space where everything had been revealed the day before. I spoke slowly, carefully, making sure every word landed softly but firmly. I told them that from that moment forward, the ranch, our family legacy, would be protected. I told them that I would make sure that no one, No one, not even my own sister, could manipulate or pressure them into decisions that went against their true intentions. I promised them peace. I promised them that I would shield them from conflict. I promised them that fairness and truth would guide the next steps, not anger. We went together to the small law office in town, a place I had visited many times over the years for paperwork, titles, and permits. The attorney, a patient man who knew our family for decades, greeted us with a cautious warmth. He had heard the story in fragments from the earlier visits, but had not seen the depth of the betrayal. I laid the original will before him, explaining in detail what had happened, how my sister had tried to manipulate my parents, and how the footage had revealed the full truth. My parents nodded beside me, small gestures of support, their hands clasped tightly together as if holding on to courage. The attorney reviewed the documents carefully. He traced the ink with a finger, read aloud every line of the original will, and finally looked up at us. He confirmed what I already knew. The land legally belonged to the child who had stayed and maintained it, the one who had dedicated decades of labor, sweat, and loyalty to preserve the ranch for the family. That child was me. Every word, every clause, every signature aligned perfectly. We worked together to redraw the paperwork. This time there would be no room for manipulation, no ambiguous language, no loopholes. Every line clearly stated that the ranch would belong to me, not out of greed, not out of anger, not as a punishment for my sister, but out of fairness, out of truth, out of justice for the years I had given and the life I had built with patience and loyalty. I also made a conscious decision to leave space for compassion. I did not exclude my sister entirely. I knew that cutting her out completely could lead to lifelong resentment and more conflict than necessary. So I allowed her a small portion of liquid assets, money that would give her some security without giving her control over the ranch she had never truly cared for. It was not a concession to weakness. It was a closure to a chapter that had been clouded by manipulation and lies. It was my way of ending the story without hatred, without creating another wound in our family that might never heal. Driving back to the ranch that afternoon, I felt a strange relief settle over me. The sky was wide and blue above the fields, the sun warm on my back. I walked among the pastures and barns, touching the fences and gates I had repaired countless times. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt ordinary. This land was mine, yes, but it was also ours in a way that felt right, protected, respected, honored. And in that moment, I realized that revenge did not have to be fire and destruction. Revenge could be truth. Revenge could be patience. Revenge could be calm, quiet, and unshakable. It could be setting boundaries, drawing lines, and ensuring that those who tried to take what was not theirs would see that honesty and integrity could withstand any scheme. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift from my chest. The pressure, the worry, the anger, the doubt, they were all gone. The plan had worked. Justice had been served in the only way that mattered. And the ranch, the legacy of generations, would continue as it always should have, nurtured by someone who truly cared. When we returned home from the attorney's office, the ranch felt quieter than it had in weeks. The air seemed lighter, yet the tension that had gripped every room, every corner of the house, lingered like a shadow refusing to leave. I noticed the small things first. The curtains hanging slightly differently after being washed, the old rocking chair creaking in the corner of the porch, the faint scent of my mother, baking from the morning before. Life seemed ordinary, almost peaceful, but I knew the storm had not fully passed. The storm had simply moved from chaos into the silence before the final act. She was waiting. My sister had packed bags, neatly folded and stacked by the front door. The way she stood there, rigid and upright, her eyes locked on me with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and something I could not immediately name, told me everything I needed to know. She had expected resistance from me, but not this calm, quiet, unshakable strength. She had expected me to crumble, to beg for compromise, to falter under the pressure of her manipulations. She had expected me to surrender the life I had built, the land I had cared for, the future that was rightfully mine. But none of that happened. I stepped inside the house and looked at her without a word. I did not shout. I did not lecture. I did not argue. I simply met her gaze with the kind of calm certainty that could not be broken. I saw the flicker of realization pass across her face, that subtle moment when she understood that her plans had failed, that she had overestimated her power, underestimated the patience and dedication that had defined my life. For a long moment we stood like that, silently acknowledging the end of something that had begun years ago but had been simmering quietly beneath the surface. My parents sat on the couch, holding each other's hands. Their faces were full of sadness for what had been lost in the process, but also a quiet relief for the truth finally being recognized. I could feel their shoulders release some of the weight they had been carrying, the guilt, the fear, the helplessness. They had been trapped by her schemes for so long, but now, finally, the air between us seemed lighter, breathable. She said nothing. There were no last words, no threats, no attempts at persuasion. She simply picked up her bags, slung them over her shoulders, and began walking toward the truck parked by the barn. Every step she took was measured, cautious, almost hesitant, as if she were stepping into a world she no longer controlled. I watched her go. My parents watched her go, and for the first time the house felt like home again. Not just walls and furniture, but the emotional foundation of a family slowly healing, slowly reclaiming itself. As the truck pulled away down the long dirt road, I saw the dust swirl around the tires and disappear into the evening air. She did not look back once. Her eyes never met ours. There was no final glance, no last defiance, no attempt to hold on to what she could not take. She was gone. The chapter she had tried to write in our lives had ended abruptly, leaving only the truth intact, the land protected, the family finally free from her manipulation. I walked out onto the open fields, the sun low on the horizon, casting everything in a warm, golden light that made the ranch glow as if the land itself had been waiting for this moment. The fences shimmered, the grass swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the barn I had repaired so many times seemed to stand taller, prouder, bathed in the last light of the day. The air was scented with earth and hay, warm and dry, carrying the quiet hum of life I had tended for decades. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs completely, and for the first time in months, perhaps even years, I felt steady, truly steady. The anger, the betrayal, the exhaustion, all of it began to settle, replaced by a quiet satisfaction that came not from revenge, but from justice, from fairness, from knowing that I had protected what truly mattered. I walked slowly across the fields, my boots pressing into the soil that had shaped me as much as I had shaped it. Every step felt grounding. Every sound, the distant crow of a bird, the faint rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind, reminded me that life, even after pain and betrayal, could be whole again. I looked out over the farthest pastures where the sunlight caught the tops of the tall grasses and felt a sense of completeness that words could never fully capture. The storm had passed. The dust had settled. My sister had left. The truth was acknowledged, and my parents were finally free from the shadows that had held them captive. And standing there on the land I had nurtured, protected, and loved for decades, I knew that this moment, this feeling, was what mattered most. This was the real victory, not in punishment, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in reclaiming what was rightfully mine while leaving the door open for healing, for peace, for a future that could finally be ours. The ranch was alive again. So was I, and the horizon, wide and golden, promised that nothing could ever take this away again. Life after the storm, after the reveal, after the confrontation, settled into a calm that almost felt unreal at first. The ranch, which had carried the weight of conflict for so many weeks, now breathed freely again, as if the land itself had been holding its breath and was finally exhaling. The fences I had repaired still creaked gently in the wind, the barn stood sturdy and proud, and the open pastures seemed to stretch endlessly under the wide Texan sky, reminding me that some things, if protected and nurtured, could endure anything. My parents grew comfortable once more. My father's eyes no longer held that quiet tension, the shadows of doubt and guilt slowly lifting from his face. He would sit on the porch in the evenings, his hat tipped against the setting sun, sipping iced tea and telling stories from years past, stories I had heard countless times but now sounded sweeter somehow. My mother returned to her quiet routines, baking bread and preparing meals with a lightness I had not seen for months. She smiled more freely, laughed more easily, and held my hand as she used to when I was a boy helping her in the garden. The worry that had once pinned their hearts had been replaced with relief, with gratitude, with the simple joy of living without the constant tension of manipulation shadowing every decision. The ranch remained safe. Every acre, every pasture, every barn, every fence, every dusty trail I'd walked countless times was now secure under the care of someone who had lived for it, loved it, and fought for it. The land stayed in the hands of the one who had worked it, the one who had given decades of his life to maintain it, to preserve it, and to protect it. And though my sister never returned, her absence was not a wound but a kind of quiet peace. Sometimes silence has its own kind of resolution. A way of letting the past rest without constant confrontation. A way of reminding us that not every conflict requires endless battle to reach closure. As I walked across the fields at dusk, the sky painted in shades of rose, gold, and deepening purple, I realized that the true weight of the story was not in the land itself, not in the inheritance, not even in the confrontation. The weight had been in the lessons it carried, in the truths it revealed about loyalty, patience, and integrity. And those lessons, I knew, would guide me for the rest of my life. The moral of my story is simple yet profound. Loyalty has value, but it must never be taken for granted. Those who stay quietly, who bear responsibility without complaint, who protect and nurture even when unnoticed, are not weak. They are patient, deliberate, and observant. And when the truth becomes their weapon, no one can stop them. My inheritance had not simply been reallocated. It had been stolen, quietly, insidiously, over time. But I reclaimed it not with rage, not with vengeance, but with evidence, patience, and calm, deliberate steps. I learned that anger might burn quickly, but truth endures. Justice is not always loud or dramatic. It often moves in quiet, steady increments that no manipulator can predict. By remaining steadfast, by paying attention, by holding on to the evidence of my life and my labor, I achieved what words alone could never secure. I restored not only my inheritance but the respect, the dignity, and the peace that had been eroded by deceit. And so, as the last rays of sunlight fell over the pasture, casting long shadows across the land I had fought for, I felt a sense of completion unlike any I had known before. I felt the legacy of my family, my efforts, my life, fully honored. I felt the weight of loyalty validated. I felt the satisfaction of justice quietly delivered, without malice or cruelty, only the strength of truth and perseverance. And that is how I reclaimed my legacy, how I protected what mattered most, how I ensured that loyalty, patience, and integrity were not merely words, but actions that shaped the course of my life. The ranch, the family, and the story of my inheritance were secure once more, held in hands that valued them, understood them, and respected them fully. And in that, I found a peace deeper than any revenge, a calm that would remain long after the last shadows of betrayal had disappeared into the past.